Okay, so good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you. And as Nate said, I'm the director of the Institute of Educational Technology. This is our building. And perhaps some of you might not realize that the OU is the largest open distance university in Europe. We've 170,000 students, and 24,000 of those have declared a disability of some sort. And we're finding that number increasing as it's happening across all universities. So this afternoon, I'd like to talk about who's driving this digital assessment. I'd like to look at it from the students' point of view, the teachers, researchers, what the awarding bodies are doing, software developers, and finally the disruptors that are in this arena. I think it's best to start with what students feel about assessment. And this is from a PhD project by Chris McKillop. She wanted to ask students to give her stories about assessment, their feelings. She found that didn't work very well as a methodology. But as soon as she asked them to make drawings, she got, this is one of them. And you can see, look here, careful of edges. It's hard getting to the holy grail of the diploma or degree that you want. But here's another one that really is quite shocking. So students have very deep, acute feelings about assessment. And what about the awarding bodies? What's the challenge they bring to us? I'm sure if I asked you to put your hands up and asked you about, what's your position on pedagogy, you'd probably all say you were constructivist. And the constructivist modus operandi doesn't always sit terribly well with institutional reliability and accountability. So there's always a tension here from how we teach and how we're assessing the bodies that administer degrees, whether they be universities or other bodies, professional bodies. There's always this tension. And what's our big challenge really? The challenge is representing the analysis of learning that can be readily understood by the awarding bodies, by teachers, and the feedback, of course, by students themselves. Now, here's an example of an early AI system built by Ali Fowler, and it's an old one because it was built in Lisp. And I'm sure you're all far more aware of this than I am, that if you're teaching someone a second language and you don't correct mistakes, they can fossilize. And so this system was set up for teaching Spanish to first-year students at university, where they couldn't get the feedback to the students quickly enough. But what they instantiated was a 2-attempt score. So you had a translation to do, you had a first attempt, you were given some feedback, and then you tried a second attempt. But I think what's important for all of us doing any assessment is that when you are, asking students to submit something and then you're giving them some feedback and then they can have another try, it's best to give more weight to the first attempt, because that ensures the students give careful consideration to the construction of the first answer. They don't rush through it and then wait to see what the feedback is. And this has proved to be very successful with a lesson for all of us using e-assessment. But I think in all of this, we need to, especially online, maintain our empathy with the learner. And something I'm writing about at the moment, and have been for a while, is advice for action. So any feedback must help the student move forward and take into account socio-emotive feedback. So what I like to draw on now is some work from Carol Dweck, because I built a system called Open Comment, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, an automatic feedback system. And I was very taken with Dweck's work, where praise for ability, she says, can hinder learning. And praise often equates with being clever. And if you get negative feedback, you feel you're without ability and can be demoralizing. So where does she get all that inference from? What she did with Müller was to work with thousands and thousands of children in the US in schools. And the tests they were given were Raven's matrices. These are non-verbal reasoning tasks, which would have been the equivalent of some of the tests that were used in the old IQ tests used in the UK. And what they did is they gave the students, the pupils at school, 3 tests. And they did a randomized controlled trial. Some of them were praised for effort, some for ability. They had a second test. And then the third test was a medium difficulty. But what was so interesting here is the score was up 1 point for people praised for effort and down 1 point for those praised by ability. And so she came up with her theory of mindsets. And people who have closed mindsets, you know, think that there's something very basic about intelligence or ability and you can't change it. You can learn new things, but you can't change your ability per se. And those of us who've done PhDs know that, you know, a thesis is 2% inspiration, 98% perspiration. So if you've got a growth mindset, you feel that you can change the way you are and you can substantially change your ability and intelligence through effort. So what are the characteristics of people with fixed mindsets? They've often been found learning very, very easy, always been top of the class, but then become very super sensitive about being wrong, always trying to prove themselves, and they don't want to put themselves into any position where they don't look good. And what about a growth mindset? And this is what we're aiming for, surely, with our students, is they stretch themselves, they see obstacles as challenges, and this creates a lack of tension when they are learning. And they're open to people supporting them, giving constructive criticism, but they don't see that as something that's affecting themselves. For example, I often send my journal articles as I'm writing to people I know who are able and will give me good feedback. And I don't see this as personal attack. I see this as helping me do my job better. So moving towards a growth mindset. So open comment was something I was asked to build for the social sciences. This happens to be something for history because they didn't want to use multiple choice questions. So influenced by Dweck, I mean, this system, of course, you know, has got a limited amount of questions where it can give automatic feedback. There's causality. The questions have to have a causal framework. Because although these are AR systems, they're not that smart. So this was a question about the First World War, and no idea was the answer. And here we've got, you know, a response. But what's important, I think, for us to discuss is for you to see what's under the bonnet. What is the system doing when it's giving feedback to free text entry? Well, for history, we thought, well, the best thing to do was detection of errors, because you could get incorrect dates, incorrect inferences, causality, etc. So, but always the system is taking notice of effort. So you've done well to start answering this question. Perhaps you misunderstood it, and then there's, you know, answer to help you answer it. And then revealing the first omission, something that you've left out. So consider the role of said. This is what, you know, the algorithm underneath. Praise what's correct, point out what's missing, praise effort. Then reveal the second omission. And this isn't always the way we mark ourselves, but this goes through it logically. So then the system would request clarification, look for inferencing, and check the causality. Now, when I was building this, I acted as a history student, and I was very cross because I'm a scientist, and of course I'm probably a bit big-headed and build systems, and I expected to get an A grade. And I'd, written in the causality, but I could only get a C grade. So I went back to the tutor, and then I realized, I found out from questioning, that in history even, it's a bit like science, the causal factors are weighted. So that you don't just report the causality and the variables, you have to weight those variables, and then you can get an A grade. And this is what I'm talking about here, I think, is the rules of the game. And for students moving into new domains, new areas of academe, then they have to really understand the rules of the game, how to talk about the subject, how to write about it, and to move forward. So as I mentioned earlier, assessment is difficult, and feedback is difficult too in receiving it for some people, and it can have an emotional response. So how can we support and provide emotional support in the feedback we give students? And what I turned to was Bales categories, because I was going to look at all the feedback given to students on their assignments. And at the Open University, a distance university, we give intense, detailed feedback to students, something that I'd not experienced myself till I was studying for my PhD. So that's our teaching vehicle. So I found these categories. Bales was a psychologist in the 50s. He was looking at, he was looking at group interaction. And what he found there was that for any successful group, you need a cognitive lead and a socio-emotive lead. Now that can be in the same person, but it can be in two people, and it makes the group work very well. But why I wanted to use his categories was, you see, you've got positive reactions and you've got negative reactions, because I was interested in socio-emotive responses. But also, if you look at the B categories, direct, propose, control, orientate, repeat, clarify, confirm, evaluate, those are the teaching comments that you would be writing to the student. And questioning as well, asking for information, opinion, and suggestions. So we did actually analyze thousands and thousands of scripts, but to understand what the system we built was based on, let's have a look at this, at the findings when the Bales categories were used against all the comments in this particular course, H801. If you look at this bar chart, you'll see on the y-axis that we have A passes, B passes, C and D passes. A, B, C and D comments. The A comments are praise, B the teaching comments, B the teaching comments, C the questioning, D the negative comments. Now pass 1 is a high pass, so let's look at the A categories. Praise. We've got more praise for the students who get the best marks, less praise for the students who get the lower marks. That's not unreasonable. But what's interesting for the teaching comments is you'll get less teaching comments for the high grades because they've done better, but you should get these higher, larger number of teaching comments for people who aren't doing so well, because they will need more help. My hypothesis with the questioning this group, this C group, was that you'd see more questioning in the past ones, because you'd be pushing the student more, trying to get them to do even better by questioning them, raising issues they could look at. Unfortunately, it was the other way around. But when I started to investigate, it was really interesting. because it was the language we were responding in English. And what we were doing was, instead of saying it would be better if you did this in this part of the answer, we said, have you thought about adding X to this argument? And so it was a very polite way of actually directing. And in fact, our non-native speakers get very fed up with this. And they say, why don't you tell me directly? So that was an interesting finding. But we did find there was less negativity going on. We train our tutors. Don't forget, we've got sometimes 5,000 students on a course. There are lots of tutors that support each group. And we know that students, at a distance, it's very difficult to receive negative responses, but you need to make clear things that are wrong. So this was an excellent finding. So we built Open Mentor, which would automatically strip out all the comments on the assignment, feed them back, analyze them. You could go and look and investigate. These are examples of things we found. But this is the important part that I want to show you. We're using Open Mentor for training. It's used in Southampton because they worked with me, and King's College London on a JISC, making this better with JISC funding. And this is about helping the tutor understand about feedback. So here we've got, a pseudonym here with a student with a assigned mark of 61 at grade 3. And because of all the analysis we've done with thousands and thousands of scripts, we've got this underlying algorithm. So you can see here, it picks up the actual number of comments for that grade, grade 3, and it puts it beside the ideal number from the algorithm after analysing so many scripts. So for this tutor, there wasn't enough praise, there wasn't enough teaching, there wasn't enough questioning, but there was too much negativity. So we've been using this system to train our tutors, support them in going online and giving feedback. I know a lot of you are linguists and probably know a lot more about natural language processing and analysis using NLP than I do. But this is a project I did with, had EPSRC funding with Oxford. And the problem we were trying to solve was that for us in a distance learning, if students don't give in the first assignment, they usually don't continue. So we don't have special support for students writing their first essays. So what if we could build a system that could do that, an automatic system that wasn't the tutor, that had, wouldn't be telling the tutor about anybody's difficulties or foibles in writing. But my idea was, coming from Pask's theory, conversation theory, which I studied when I was a doctoral student quite a long time ago now, was that, if you understand something, you can actually say it back to someone else. So that's why I wanted to work with Oxford, because at that time, they were the best in summarization. So if the computer could summarize what a draft, then it would be like saying it back to someone, and you could judge whether you'd written what you wanted to write. So it does a summary. The system, Open Essays, provides a summary. It also gives you key phrases, key sentences, key words. And we give different types of feedback, visualizations, etc. But the important thing, it doesn't tell you what to do. It gives you feedback for you to make the changes. That's the student. So a system looks like this. You put your draft in. It will start to analyze the parts of your essay. It will give you an abstract, which is a summarization. It will show you the introduction, the main evidence, and the summarization. You get hints as you go through to help you understand what's going on and to help you. And there are different types of analysis and graphics that appear. Now, this keyword dispersion was very, very helpful, because if you think about what's an essay really, or a report, it's a story. You're telling a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. And the beginning tells the reader what you're going to talk about. The middle provides the evidence about what you were going to talk about. And the conclusion tells you again what you were aiming to talk about, and the inferences that you should make from all the evidence that's been presented. So if the key words were in the introduction, where you've told the reader what you're going to talk about, and they don't appear in the conclusion, then there's something wrong, there's a disjoint. So students found that very, very helpful. There were other features too, but we use these in anger with our master's students. And, you know, the number of drafts made a difference to the improvement in the essay. And we find students, you know, often our students are in work, you know, they're doing this part-time. They don't have a lot of time for drafting. And a lot of them said, goodness, this was so helpful, you know, drafting and getting feedback on drafts. But we found they got better marks with the drafting, and also the overall grade was better for the year that used this system than the year that didn't have it. But this is something that's really interesting that we haven't really tested yet, and that's the rainbow diagram. So here we've got a piece of text, and we can analyze that text into a graph form using a cosine rule. And here, in these rainbow, we're calling them rainbow diagrams. The violet color is the introduction, and the red color represents the conclusion. But you can see how the interaction of the nodes takes place. So what we did is we put in a pretend essay of 10 identical paragraphs to see what would happen. And this was the pattern that came out. If you take 50 identical sentences, you've almost got a globe going on here, but there's no interaction between the violet nodes and the red nodes of any linkage between introduction and conclusion. You wouldn't expect that because they're identical sentences. But look what happens when you put in a Stanford University Booth Prize essay. The introduction and conclusion very tightly joined together, and the evidence is very joined together. It's very coherent here. Obviously, we've got some spurious points, but this gives some indication of what a very good piece of writing would look like using this system. Here's an OU essay with a high grade. Here's one with a very low grade, and it's very disjointed. The ideas, they're not flowing, connected. So what we did is we took, we did a trial as part of the research where students submitted 2 essays, and the rainbow diagrams we looked at, and by eye, we looked at the relationship with the marks. We could only do this with high, low, and medium. We couldn't actually say what a mark would be. So that was done by eye by rapporteurs. And what's interesting is that essays rated as high using this system would be expected to receive 8.56 percentage points, more than essay rated as medium, and 17.2 percentage points higher than essays rated as low. So we're looking to work with this system. We're working on it now to see if we can also give the students not only a rainbow diagram of the coherence, but also give them an indicative mark and Future Learn have been talking to me about whether, if we can get this working well, whether we could use this for MOOCs, because MOOCs you don't give anybody marks for something you submit to MOOCs, but it would be give an indication of how well you're doing in a free course. As I said before, you know, what are we trying to teach people, really, our students? Some of it in our domain is what I was calling the rules of the game. So why don't we give students a few more hints about what we're asking them to do in their assignments? And in some randomized controlled trials, we actually gave students hints before writing, and we found a significant difference between those who had hints and those that didn't. So let's now look at what the software developers are up to. And we know that forums in MOOCs, in micro-credentials, in all sorts of short courses that we're producing, maybe even in our own ordinary courses, we have forums. It's difficult to manage for a tutor what posts should be responded to, and a natural language processing can provide summarization, and this is what is, you know, coming forward now through software developers. And Nate, in his introduction, talked about the Tesla project. This was a very big project with 18 European partners, which I was part of. And this was a complete tool that was built with voice recognition, face recognition, keystroke pattern detection, which is an excellent, absolutely excellent indication of whether somebody has produced the work. There's anti-plagiarism, which you will find anyway, probably you probably use Turnitin or something like that. And there was forensic analysis. So we built a complete system. We also had lawyers on board to make sure the consent forms were absolutely correct to comply with GDPR. So the system has a plugin. It can work through this for Moodle. The students do the voice or face recognition. They get that some base data in. The learner then works on an assignment. It's, you know, analyzed and then sent back. So you can see how it all works. There, off it goes. We had 7 countries involved, and thousands of students took part in the studies. So we found that the system would work, and it was used in a lot of different domains: arts, humanities, languages, social and legal sciences, health sciences, engineering and architecture. And we ran a series of 3 pilot studies throughout the project. The language of the courses was as such here, as you can see here from the different countries that were involved. And we collected data on 532 activities. So we piloted a lot of different sorts of activities. It was used for diagnostic assessment, formative, summative. We had supervised, unsupervised. We even had collaborative activity as well. And we had, you know, multiple choice, free text, perform, enact, or demonstrate. And we used, you know, the audio and the video. And here is a selection of the and synopsis of the activities. So we have quizzes, online essay writing, forums, assignment submissions, all different types of activities. So we were trying to, you know, really bust the system to see how far it would go. What's interesting from the students' point of view was they wanted to be confident that they understood that, you know, there are essay mills, that there is plagiarism going on. But what they wanted was that they will go on to employment, and so that their employers would be confident that where they obtained their degrees, that it was not plagiarism, it wasn't second rate, and that there were systems in place to ensure that this wasn't taking place. And that was a finding that was very strong and very important, we thought, at this time, and probably more important now with COVID. But they found it was a positive experience, most of them, and they got used to using it because we were doing it in sort of classwork or other parts of the course ready for some summative assessment. So finally, I want to talk about some disruptors. So what are the disruptors here? We've got commercial companies trying to sell us all sorts of things to help us with our teaching. You know, our learning analytics, you know, we can't do any of this. And there are private online learning institutions that are pushing the boundaries. And of course, another disruptor here is government policies for shorter, cheaper courses. And my opinion is, you know, that we should be working with companies, commercial companies, as teachers, educators, to get them to build something that we want and not something they want to sell to us. So AI for education, which is my area, you know, chatbots, recommender systems are coming in. We at the Open University are building some to help our students with finding digital resources that were in their course. We're even going to try and work with Alexa. So you can say I'm learning about natural language processing, find me all the references for natural language processing on my course or the part of the course. What about having your own feedback? We've got your own robot. We've got now, that's a picture of him in our lab, very impressive little robot. And I was thinking, you know, robots, this robot, you know, its eyes change, its color, its eyes, the irises, it moves its little head, etc. How about, you know, language rehearsal? This little robot isn't going to get cross with you, but it will give you some feedback linked up. So is that going to be the future? Now, I'd like to finish with something that I find very amusing and maybe something that I might be ending my talks with in 10 years' time, that I've only got 5 minutes left, but I can just take 3 million questions. But I've left you some references, because I'm sure, I suspect you will receive these slides afterwards. And I'd like to thank you very much for listening.